Hey everyone. So I'm going to review the assessment expectations in the course. And I'm here in the syllabus on Blackboard, and I've scrolled down to this assessment evidence. And you'll see that we have both formative and summative assessments that are expected. So far, in terms of formative assessments, you've been engaging in class discussions and the assigned readings and other resources. And I've been really both inspired and impressed by all of the sharing and the thinking that you've done in these first couple of weeks. So I appreciate that. Later on in the course, you'll be able to have an opportunity to give and receive feedback using some tools with your peers. And so we'll get to that too. And most of the class reflections are going to take place when I ask you to update the KWL that you've created in Padlet. But there'll also be just a couple of formative checkpoints throughout the course where I'll do Google surveys to see where you happen to be and if your needs are being met and how we can maybe adjust expectations if that's helpful to you. The mini presentations, and I'm really want to emphasize mini. Um, I'll review the expectations for those in just a minute. Summative assessment, you'll see there are these design cycles. And really, what I mean by that is that I'm going to ask you to create just two plans where you are clear about finding a need that you have around some kind of a learning expectation, creating an implementation plan, and selecting pretty intentionally one of the assessment tools. Going ahead and using that and reflecting a little bit on that so that you can experience what a cycle might be where you're applying the learning from this course. So there are two of those, and let me review right now what the expectations are for that. So I'll be linking out to this document for you because you'll be making a copy of that and then using that to build your plan. And I'll be giving you formative feedback on this too. The way you're going to create this plan is again that you're going to articulate what an assessment, a need happens to be in your own kind of context, and that can either be focused on student learning. So you're thinking about a way that you want to better understand what students have learned that you've been trying to instruct within your context. Or you can come and you can think about your own practice and adopt one of these tools that can help you be a better assessor in the work that you're doing with any of the learners in any of your context. Okay, so I'll be showing an example of that in just a minute, but there's two ways to approach this. So you're going to be describing a little bit about what the context is in terms of where you've identified this need and what your goal happens to be. The guiding questions are the ones that you, or just a single one, that you actually want to answer after you've done the implementation. So all of this work, and then you go back and say, hey, was I able to answer this question? And then if they're within your context, you have a proficiency or a learning target. So again, if it's student learning that you're after, you can look at some of the proficiencies that you've articulated in your own school, a very specific learning target. And if it's your own educator practice, you might think about some of the educator standards. And if there's not one that's pops out to you, we can work together on finding that. You're going to be clear about the plan, and so you'll be describing the implementation plan and the tools and the materials that you've chosen. You're going to be articulating where you happen to be in terms of the assessment for the goal. Is it a formative where you can draw some conclusions from the data that you get to make some next actionable steps? Is it more summative in the sense that it's a project or a performance task, and so you're interested in seeing sort of a full body of what students know and can do? We also know that there's a kind of a muddy waters around whether the formative or summative is the distinction is pretty clear. Clearly, you can learn a lot of formative information from a summative task. So this connection to the technology framework later on in the course, I'm going to be reviewing both the TPAC and the SAMR model. These are models just to help you articulate and think about why you're intentionally selecting a certain technology and what your hope is for that technology. So don't worry about that now. We'll approach that a little bit later. Again, I said in the course. Here's where you're going to be linking out to some artifacts or evidence of the fact that you've done this implementation and now you have sort of ways to document and maybe even kind of curate that and reflect upon that. So here are the two reflection prompts as you go forward. You'll see that everybody will have one of these single point rubrics. Again, a little bit later in the course, we'll be looking a little bit more about how single point rubrics work, and so I want to model that. I've got each one of the proficiency I can statements here in terms of each part of this plan, of this design cycle. And what I'll be doing is I'll be giving feedback, formative feedback, in either of these two columns. And so after the first draft is submitted, I will give you some feedback on what you might need to work on in order to have met proficiencies in each one of these I can statement goals. And then I'll also articulate what you're doing well on And then we can use that formatively. So whatever happens to land in here, eventually will all be moved over into the right-hand column, and that's when you'll know that you've met the proficiency for this assignment. Let me just quickly show you that there's an example that I have here. This is an educator who found a need in her practice that students were emailing her all of the work, and she was having really difficulty keeping track of all of that. And so what happened is it meant that she wasn't able to have the efficiency that she needed to be able to give them formative feedback in a timely way that made sense to her. So she's adopting a technology that's going to help her be a better assessor. And you'll see you can work through this. I don't have to walk you totally through this, but she has some questions that are driving this. She's clear about her assessment goal, and she's created this implementation plan. She is going to be using Google Drive, and she's doing protocols in terms of student folders to be able to organize that. There she has the artifacts that she's linked out to, and then she's given some feedback. So again, just an example so that you can come back to see if that helps you. All right, let's just quickly look at the mini technology expectations. There are 4, and they are meant to be small. I'm calling them presentations, but since this is an asynchronous course and not all of us feel like we can meet outside of it, and I fully get that, outside of the course, we'll be sharing those together. Your goal is basically to create a toolkit, if you will, that you can recommend some of these tools to your colleagues and give you a chance to explore in kind of an informal way. In these mini presentations, you'll be answering these 3 questions, basically defining what the technology is, how you can use it to assess learning, and then what are the resources could you recommend to help somebody who wants to go ahead and do a little bit of a dive into that. I've got an example here, and I'm just going to click on that so that you can see. This is from one of my colleagues teaching the technology integration course. This is a mini presentation that was created by some of the students in the class. So you'll see basically they're looking at how Google Hangouts can work, and they're going ahead and answering these 3 questions. They're defining a little bit of what Google Hangout happens to be, its goal, and what you need to be able to go forward with that. They've given a list here of how it can be used educationally and to assess learning. And you'll see here in the final bullet, Google Hangouts has a recording feature so that if students are collaborating together, they can record that collaboration as they're building on something. So that's a really neat window into being able to see what they are thinking about, making that thinking visible. Again, they give a little bit more of a how-to, and then they're pretty generous around all of these link outs to other ways that you can learn how to use Google Hangout if you would like to do that. So I appreciate it also that they basically said that they used Google Hangout while they were actually creating this little mini presentation, which they then shared with the class. Okay, I'm going to be adding a Nearpod as another example. Next week, you'll be experiencing a Nearpod lesson that I've created, but then I'll also do a model of a mini presentation for that. And we're going to collaborate on creating an ebook in Book Creator for Chrome. Again, I'll give more instructions in the next 2 weeks, but it's a pretty versatile tool, and it's very intuitive for students to use. And I have a lot of examples of teachers and students using it around the state here to do formative and summative assessment practices. So I'll be able to share that as that moves forward. Just give you a quick example of what that looks like when people collaborate to create one of these book creators. And so this is at Vermont Fest last November, and a number of teachers came on board, and they each created within Lucy's library a book. And then the book was able to be sort of stitched together in the way that she's gone ahead and done that. So each one of these is a contribution about a practice change in terms of technology integration from everyone who participated in this. So this is Erica Zimmer talking about her first year teaching. We'll get right through that. And then we have Charlie McFadden, who had some questions for himself. And so come and take a peek at this. It's a pretty good anthology for teachers, but that's what Book Creator ends up looking like. And we'll be putting our mini presentations in there. I hope this was helpful to you. And again, I'll be linking both of these out so that you have ready access to them.